This is panel 2 out of 3. It did strike me actually in the previous panel that it sort of bled the sort of theme. This is the party's future, and the first panel was where are we now. I think the two bleed into each other. I think there's interplay between the two. So I think that's absolutely fine. We're not going to try and just keep it to that. The third session is going to be the more outward-looking face of the SDP in the political world. First of all, can everyone hear me, even at the back here? Fantastic. So, quick introductions, and then, unusually for this panel sequence, I'm going to say a few words of explanation about who I am and what I am and why I am. But we have, our three panelists are going to be Jake Painter, Hugh de Burg, and Sebastian Moore, in that order. The format is the same, 5 minutes from each of the panelists after I've said a few words, 6 minutes if you're lucky, and then mainly questions and points from the floor, and then a wrapping up, maybe a little bit of feedback from the panelists if it works in the middle, but it's mainly about voices from the entire room here, and then a couple of minutes of each to wrap up at the end. Okay, we'll try and keep to time. Okay, so, but before we start, I am going to just take a couple of moments to talk about me, actually, because for many people, you won't have come across me before. 16 months ago, I wasn't even a member of the SDP. I did stand in the election, and now appear right on the panel here. So, the role I'm taking on as chair is essentially an administrative and governance one, but this personal explanation of my journey does stray into the raw political, obviously. What is the role about? It's about supporting the NCC, regional chairs, and the whole membership. It isn't a leadership position from the top as such, because that is William, and that is Hilary, and that is clear. So everyone enters politics for different reasons. For me, after 35 years living in Ealing, West London, a lovely part of the world, it was the real and growing threat from practical sectarianism, including a trend towards geographical zoning along secular lines, or sorry, I should say sectarian lines. What an awful prospect that would be for our country. The actual trigger for entering frontline politics as a candidate in this past election was twofold. It was a conversation of encouragement from Daniel McNay, Welsh Regional Chair, who's here today. So thank you very much for that inspiration. But the second encouragement, if you could call it that, was an experience of mine outside my house at 2 o'clock in the morning one Saturday, of an SUV driving up the road, very residential road, with its sunroof open and a box of fireworks being fired upwards and forwards down the road. Unmistakably a simulated rocket attack. That was shocking to me, that was shocking to my family, it was shocking to our neighbours, and fortunately shocking also to the police. But that's what tipped me over the edge to say, I need to stand up. So I stood for the SDP in Ealing Central and Acton on a community building anti-sectarian ticket. It's for this reason, really, this anti-sectarian impetus, really, that I strongly believe in the adage of culture being upstream of politics and upstream of economics. All three have to be tightly coupled together. Culture does not mean entering into the culture wars per se. That's not at all what I'm saying. Economics is, of course, crucial. I would say that as a graduate economist, albeit only tangentially employed as an economist over the years, I mean, somewhat less tangentially than a certain Chancellor of the Exchequer. In my view, economics does have to be related to culture, or it could become as unhinged as, for instance, Hayekian free market dogma, which is completely, in the end, devoid of culture, because culture itself has been priced. I believe the SDP's philosophical foundation, as William has elaborated so well, and the policies do encompass culture, politics and economics, and it does it in a coherent and reasonably complete fashion, albeit, as that Hilary said, it does need building out more. It is a huge asset, absolutely huge asset. We are a party of societal rootedness, and yes, a sense of humanised home. Contrast this with the Tories, Labour and Lib Dems, and also the Greens, all of whose manifestos can be described as the politics of an international airport. That's not original to me. I'm sure I've heard it somewhere else. It's all about managing effective transit and basic, if shiny, accommodation, plus an array of solar panels around the perimeter. The only real difference between the four parties, as far as I can see, is that the Lib Dems would add a fun fair and a karaoke room. That is a dismal image, and not just of the comic figure of Ed Davey that's popped up in everyone's minds. It's devoid of rootedness, and it makes impossible any sense of traditional British warm welcome. After all, at an airport, it is only the tannoy that announces superficial words of welcome from the airport authorities on behalf of no one but themselves. The SDP's advocacy of societal rootedness is different, fundamentally so. I liked Adam Hibbert's characterisation of the SDP body politic. I too think we have a strong foundation and a functional skeletal structure on which that body stands. It does need more meat on the bones. But whilst a significant increase in party funding must be a primary aim, I'm going to thank Hilary once again so much for the undoubted boost that there has been just today. We're not building a bionic man or woman, are we? We're not building a machine. We're building a body of people of talents, of drive and enthusiasm. As an ordinary party member, I've answered that call in my own way, but everyone here has their part to play. Hilary elaborated on some of those parts that people can play. Everyone can talk in the everyday conversations they have about the SDP in the confidence that when people hear our message, they naturally warm to it and like it. Finally, just very finally, some people will have seen me as part of New Culture Forum's Locals initiative, NCF Locals. So I'm national organiser for that. I'm going to manage the two roles. At the back there is Oliver, Manchester organiser. It is a set of 25 to 30 and growing grassroots organisations, grassroots groups, one in Manchester, Norwich, Southampton, Birmingham, Newcastle and so on. Ideal places for SDP people to join, no financial commitment. It's social and associative. We have Sean, who is our organiser, NCF organiser for Carlisle, for instance, and it's a great place for SDP people to be present. Gently, very gently, not in a proselytizing way, spreading the message and possibly gaining new membership. So I would encourage everyone to take a leaflet from the back, talk to Oliver, and there's a QR code to sign up to it. I'll end there. I've already taken up too much time, but I did feel I owed an explanation of who I am and why I'm here to everyone. I'm so much looking forward to working with you. I've met a lot of you today and look forward to a drink later. Okay, on that point, 5 to 6 minutes starting now.
I think this panel can broadly agree that the economic message of the SDP will be its salvation. The disagreement, however, may be on the detail. And it's on this detail, this potential expansion of our offering as a party, that I think the SDP will have the edge. A consistent draw to the SDP is its new declaration. It underpins our economic philosophy, amongst other things, and has served us well. But we can go further and supplement the strongest aspects of the new declaration, that being the social market economy. What I propose here is not to change it, although it would be nice if we could remove the constant references to our support of the free market. What I propose instead is to strengthen it with another addition, with that addition saying we favour a distributionist approach to the economy. Distributionism is the belief that ownership of the means of production and the fruits of that production should be spread as widely as possible. This is very different from the Marxist proposition. It does not advocate for the abolishment of the market economy, nor does it spread the false gospel of egalitarianism. What it says is that citizens in a society should have a stake in said society. This is important as it drives at the heart of the fundamental problems within our economic system. There is, of course, much discussion, for example, in our political discourse surrounding productivity and legitimate discussion concerning skills. But fundamentally, why are workers going to be productive when they don't have said stake in the economic system? As the late Bishop Fulton Sheen once said in his book, Liberty Under God, the only way to make them, the workers, take an interest in capital is to give them some capital to defend. How can we give people more of a stake and a say in their workplaces? One way could be through the proliferation of cooperatives, where workers will have more explicit ownership and say in their workplace. Another could be adopting the German model, where workers are given the right by law to be represented on company boards, which, if workers cannot have explicit ownership of their enterprises, can at least have participation with management. Another initiative that was introduced in France by the late great Marxist Charles de Gaulle is mandatory profit sharing. I cannot think of the number of times that I've worked in a venue, had a busy shift, and thought, we made a load of money today, and I'm going to see slightly above fuck all of it. It should be reasonable. It should be a reasonable expectation that if business is good, then the reward for workers should be good also. To the most alert SDP members, one may be aware of a trinket of this distributionist thought in our manifesto, in the form of the policy to introduce work councils, to give workers a stronger voice in the workplace, with work councils having the right to co-determination, negotiation, and to be consulted on major company decisions. Distribution also helps the condition of man. If we are truly to raise the material condition of the low orders of society and to ensure that every citizen can live a dignified existence, then we must ensure that workers can earn enough and have enough ownership that they can exercise genuine independence. As Fulton Sheen said again, independence can only come from what guarantees it, namely private property. By private property here, we do not mean principally consumable goods such as a rented house, food, clothing, and automobile, but productive wealth, his own farm, cooperative enterprises, or a share in the management, profits, or ownership of industry. This is a radical break from the current economic order. It deviates from neoliberalism in its desire for greater economic ownership instead of what we have now, where capital is concentrated in the hands of a few. It also deviates from Blairism, which seeks to mitigate against the worst aspects of the neoliberal system by making those left behind dependent on welfarism. A distributionist approach will have to be accompanied by a robust industrial policy and public investment, both key cornerstones of the SDP platform already. In order to revitalise the workforce, but the approach will still allow for people to no longer be dependent and financialised serfs, but to be able to stand on their own 2 feet instead. A distributionist approach will also be a vote winner, as anyone who's been classed as economically disposed will be at least receptive. And that's because the message is simple. Work should be rewarded, and only through genuine rewards can people in this country live a dignified existence and an independent existence. Finally, I want to say this. If the SDP is not radical, then it is pointless. Whilst we do have great parts of our agenda already, we can and should go further if we are to truly distinguish ourselves from our rivals. We must be able to say to the public that we don't want to engage in window dressing, but we want to fundamentally change the current economic order and change it for the greater whole and not just for the vested interests that the SDP prides in opposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to sell my book, Who Are We, at the conference today. 25%, by the way, will go to the party. Who Are We, I believe, because I started writing it when I joined the SDP, reflects the attitudes and ideas of many of the people in this party. It's philosophy rather than attitudes, and I'm not going to talk about its content today. It's called Who Are We and How We Will Survive in the Age of Asia, but today I want to make 3 points. The points are these. The success of the other insurgent party, Reform, at the last election makes it urgent that the SDP differentiate itself from Reform. And the second point is that the SDP is the real Labour Party. And the third point is the way forward for the SDP is to stand for economic development and the reversal of decline. First, the success of reform at the last election makes it urgent that the SDP differentiate itself from reform. Reform and we share views on immigration and the new fascism of identities ideology. So, for many people, we may be lumped together as insurgents. If so, reform will get the better of us because they have moved farther and faster. But reform has a free market economic philosophy. This is hardly surprising. Its leading members are investment bankers, property developers and commodity brokers. That's the absolute opposite of what the SDP stands for. Like the majority of voters, we are deeply suspicious of city slickers. Since the banking crises, the revelations about the immense pay packets of corporate managers and exposures of corporate corruption, nobody wants to entrust our future to these people. The SDP, in other words, is the party of the majority. From the established middle class to the precariat, most people are deeply anxious about their material future. No matter how much Nigel Farage may be celebrated for his long struggle to achieve Brexit, a party of the free market right is hardly going to convince the many that he can lead the regeneration of our country in the interests of all. The former Red Wall seats, the deindustrialised cities, the collapsed fishing towns and ruined coastal resorts need the SDP, not reform. My second point is that the SDP is the real Labour Party. It is this party which reflects the moral vision of Labour's early founders. Labour's early founders were not neo-Marxists seeking to subvert and divide. That is the Starmer Party. The SDP rejects, in William Clouston's telling expression, the Starmer Party's indifference to the condition of the people at the bottom of the pile and to the long-term security of all. In 2019, Labour lost the working classes to Boris Johnson, as they had a generation earlier to Margaret Thatcher. They got them back in 2024 only because Labour and Reform were perceived as the only alternatives to the wretched Tories. We are that alternative. The professional classes used to vote Tory, but over the last 25 years, the Tories have lost the professional classes to parties dishonestly presenting as left-wing and caring and concerned. But the Starmer Party is the enemy of both the working classes and the professional classes. It likes big corporations and crony capitalists. The Starmer Party stands for more immigration, identity politics. It represents the rich parasites at the top of the public sector, the public bodies and quangos, the ideologists in the universities and NGOs, feasting off tax paid by poorer people. It is the SDP that is the real Labour Party. The third point is this. The way forward for the SDP is to stand for economic development and the reversal of decline. The SDP should demand an absolute commitment to development, economic nationalism and a reindustrialisation strategy. A one-issue insurgent, as was UKIP, is how we need to be seen. The UK has many problems: appallingly low productivity, a gargantuan debt, a still underperforming school education system, a health service which is the worst managed in the developed world, a welfare system that is bleeding us to death, defence services so badly equipped that it can't fight the coming war, little prospect of a future of stability and employment for our children and grandchildren. These failures do not matter to globalised intellectuals, to multilateral corporations or rich types who have sold their enterprises to foreigners and now spend their cash in Miami, Cannes or the Virgin Islands. They matter very much to the ordinary people of Britain. None of these problems will be resolved without economic regeneration, more enterprises, more jobs, more investment. The role of the SDP, I put to you, is to be the champion of the economy and thus of all our futures. How we become credible to the electorate that we can do this is what we should discuss next. So to conclude, the success of reform at the last election makes it urgent that the SDP differentiate itself from reform. They are the new Conservative Party. We are the real Labour Party. And thirdly, the way forward for the SDP is to stand for economic development and the reversal of the decline of our country. Thank you for your attention.
You look almost as nervous as I do. Why am I down here? Because no one said I wasn't allowed to. So I wasn't at last year's conference because a year ago I'd barely heard of the SDP. Fast forward a year, and not only have I become a member, I've stood in 2 different elections, been in a party political broadcast, delivered over 50,000 leaflets, and because of that, been bitten by a dog. Twice. This is where I forget my speech. It's risky doing it without notes, isn't it? Okay, I'm really excited to hear what everybody thinks about the direction we should take as a party. For my part, I have 2 suggestions, 2 things that I think are vital if we're going to change the political landscape. So, number 1, we must be the embodiment of our message. Ronald Reagan said, if you're explaining, you're losing. And if we want to start winning, we've got to do more than just craft a good argument. What does that look like? So, take our name, for example. For the social part of it, it means organising community events, litter-picking sessions, gardening groups, coffee mornings. You can tell I've been spending a lot of time with Hillary. Not only will we be practicing what we preach, but people are far more likely to be sympathetic to the SDP after a litter-picking session than they will be after we've lectured them on trade deficits for half an hour. Sorry, that was a private note for William. I'm kidding. What about the democratic part of our name? We believe that the British people should have a greater say in how they're governed, and that their views be adequately represented. What better way of showing this than within the party itself? You know, a lot of people said, we're very democratic today. To be honest, I'm not sure I see it. Like, we've had 2 policy motions at the conference, a great chance to debate policy. One of them was to start a group to suggest policy, and the other was to abolish a current policy. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sympathetic to both of them. But if we want to be democratic, I think we need a better system for members to suggest policy and for then it to be decided on as a party. Number 2, we need to mobilize people around a common vision. So I've been reading a book recently called Politics is for Power, and it argues that what most of us do when we think we're doing politics, like reading the news and arguing on Twitter, is not real politics, it's political hobbyism. Real politics is fighting for the change that you want to see. Now, we can disagree on policy, as we have done a little bit today, but realistically, we agree on most of it, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And why do we agree with SDP policy? Because most people agree with SDP policy. As Rod said in his election hustings, they just don't know it yet. Everything we do as a party over the next 5 years has to be focused on bringing our message to as many people as possible. And we may not have the resources of the big parties, but who said it was supposed to be easy? What we're trying to do in ending the 2-party system has never been done before. I feel as if sometimes we're acting like a small party and pretending to be a big party, whereas we should be acting like a big party and acknowledging the fact that we're pretty small. Right? People are fed up with politics. They want something new. They want something different. Let's seize the opportunity in that. So when Rishi Sunak called the early election, I set up a little WhatsApp group with a few friends titled Campaign HQ. And I divvied up the tasks of what needed to be done. And one of my friends, who's here today, he replied saying, this is what opportunities for young people looks like. Real opportunities. I know as a young man, I'm painfully aware of this, we are desperate for a purpose. Where am I needed? How can I contribute to society? As a party, we can say to people, this is where you're needed. You don't have to be well-versed in politics. You can help with admin, logistics, videography, even bake a cake. When people say to us, the country is in a state, what are you going to do about it? We can set out our vision and say to them, now, what are you going to do about it? Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much to the three panelists for their opening thoughts. What are you going to do about it? What